What is going on, guys? Welcome back into another video. In today's video, guys, I want to go over my favorite Solar 3.0 build during the season of the Haunted for my Titan. Now, guys, this build is so good and so powerful that honestly it makes me want to switch from my Warlock main to Titan for this entire season. I mean, this thing is absolutely bananas, guys. Now, the goal of this build, guys, is to really take advantage of our throwing hammers and to always have throwing hammers available. We're also taking advantage of Roaring Flames and Soul Invictus and trying to proc Radiant and Restoration effects as much as possible. Now, to start things off, guys, we are going to be using Burning Maul for our super. Now, Burning Maul a couple weeks back actually received a 25% buff, so this super right now is one of the best DPS supers in the game. Now, we're going to be pairing that with Towering Barricade. This allows us to protect ourselves in sticky situations and also to proc Restoration with some of the armor mods that we're using. We're also using Strafe Lift and the bread and butter of the build, the Throwing Hammer, which is a powered melee. Throw a hammer from a distance. Picking up a thrown hammer fully recharges your melee ability. If the hammer struck a target, picking it up grants Cure. Now, what's great about this, guys, is that as long as you pick up that throwing hammer, you're going to have infinite powered melee abilities. If you do misplace the hammer, we are using some aspects and fragments to help get you that powered melee back as soon as possible. Now, for our grenade, guys, we're going to be using solar grenades. It's a grenade that creates a flare of solar light that continuously damages and scorches targets trapped inside. Now, moving over to our aspects, the first one we're using, guys, is Roaring Flames. Final blows with solar abilities or ignitions increase the damage of your solar abilities. This does stack 3 times as well. While Roaring Flames is active, your uncharged melee attack deals solar damage and scorches targets. Now, what's great about this aspect is it's basically going to allow us to do massive damage to bosses and majors, especially pairing it with the exotic that we're using. Now, the second aspect we're using is going to be Soul Invictus. Solar ability Final Blows, Hammer of Soul Impacts, and defeating scorched targets create sunspots. Your abilities regenerate faster and your super drains more slowly while standing in a sunspot. Sunspots apply Scorch and deal damage to targets inside. Entering a sunspot applies Restoration. Honestly, guys, this aspect is kind of insane. This gives us the ability to create sunspots with our throwing hammers, which means there are going to be sunspots all over the place, which is then scorching targets, buffing our ability regen, and giving us Restoration every single time we go into one of those sunspots. Now, moving on to the fragments, guys, the first one we're using is going to be Ember of Searing. Defeating scorched targets grants melee energy. This also gives us a plus 10 in recovery. Now, this fragment is super important in being able to get our hammer back if we ever misplace it because of the benefits on Roaring Flames with our uncharged melee attack, scorching targets. The next one is going to be Ember of Solace. Radiant and Restoration effects applied to you have increased duration. Now, the next one, guys, is probably a little bit overkill, but it's going to really lean into survivability in tricky situations. So we're using Ember of Empyrean. Solar Weapon or ability Final Blows extend the duration of Restoration and Radiant effects applied to you. Again, you do lose 10 resilience on this, but in my opinion, that is completely worth it. And the last one, guys, is going to be Ember of Torches. Powered melee attacks against combatants make you and nearby allies Radiant, and because we basically have infinite throwing hammers, you're always going to have Radiant available, which is huge for getting a nice buff in damage. Now, moving on to the armor, on my helmet, I'm using Well of Life. Picking up a solar elemental well grants increased regen for a short period of time. Now, moving on to our gauntlets and our exotic of choice for this build, it's going to be the Synthoceps. This does have the armor perk Biotic Enhancements, which increased melee lunge range and improve melee and super damage when you're surrounded. You basically have to be surrounded by 3 or more enemies to gain that buff, but you get a massive buff to those throwing hammers by using this exotic. Now, the mod that I'm rolling on the gauntlets, guys, is going to be Bountiful Wells. Elemental well mods that cause you to spawn elemental wells can now stack, spawning additional wells for each additional copy of the mod you have equipped. Now, guys, you can already see a trend with just the first couple mods that we're using. We're really trying to lean into elemental wells. That way we can get our abilities back as fast as possible. Now, moving over to my chest, I am rocking Melee Well Maker. Power melee combatant Final Blows spawn elemental wells matching your subclass energy type. On the legs, we are going to be rocking Elemental Ordnance. Defeating a combatant with a grenade spawns an elemental well that matches your subclass energy type. And moving on to our mark, we're going to be rocking Classy Restoration, which is activating your solar class ability, grants you Restoration. This honestly is not completely necessary, guys. I mean, I think for ultimate survivability, this is great, but you can certainly try to use this build without Classy Restoration and probably do pretty well because of all the sunspots we're going to have available. Also, we're rolling Solar Fulmination. Your ignitions do increased damage in an increased radius. And we are also throwing on Well of Ordnance. Picking up a Solar Elemental Well grants you additional grenade energy. Multiple copies of this mod increase this effect. Now, moving over to the weapons that I would recommend with this build. In the kinetic slot, it's completely up to you guys. I've been rolling a Fatebringer Time Loss that has Explosive Payload and Firefly. In the energy slot, guys, I've been rolling my Callus Mini Tool, which is solar damage, which I think is super important here. And it does have the perk Incandescent on it, which then spreads Scorch to other enemies nearby. And the most important weapon that you need to be using with this setup is going to be Tractor Cannon for the debuff that you can give bosses and majors to really do maximum DPS with those hammers. Now, after using this build over the last few streams, guys, I have to admit it's absolutely insane and it's a ton of fun to use. Having unlimited throwing hammers, having a ton of sunspots to heal and proc restoration, and having the debuff from Tractor Cannon and to be able to do massive DPS with your super and Burning Maul was a ton of fun, and honestly makes some of these seasonal activities a breeze to do. Honestly, I think if you're going to do a solo flawless duality run, this is the build to do it on, guys. I feel like it's going to be the easiest on a Titan, using infinite throwing hammers and getting that debuff with Tractor Cannon. Now, guys, just a quick recommendation, as with all builds this season, make sure that Resilience is up to a tier 10. Remember, Resilience got a massive buff this season, and getting up to a tier 10 is going to bring your damage reduction up to 40%, which is a massive benefit in some of these activities. Now, guys, just a quick reminder, I do stream over on Twitch 5 days a week, and if you guys are enjoying the content on the channel, be sure to hit that thumbs up and sub to the channel. It definitely helps me out, and I certainly appreciate all the amazing support. Thanks again for checking out the content on the channel, guys. Before we go, I'm going to leave you with a quick rundown of the entire build for your reference again. Also, if you guys have any recommendations or any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear your feedback and to see what you guys are using on some of your builds as well. And I will plan on seeing all of you guys in the next video.